This morning I was at another panel discussion, and one of the senior female ladies said that 60 is the new 40. And we can see that with life expectancy of women increasing across all ASEAN countries, it is important for us to ensure that women have the necessary resources and support from their family, community to age well. So we're looking at physically, emotionally, and financially. And I'm really excited. I didn't have a very long welcome address because I wanted to give more time to our two speakers. We're really fortunate, and I have great pleasure in introducing both of them. The very first speaker is Dr. Kanwaljit Soin. She's a practicing surgeon and Singapore's first female nominated member of parliament. I'm always so inspired by her energy, her positive energy, and also she's such a vivacious lady. You will see what I mean later. So Dr. Soin, Kani, as she's affectionately known, if you are ready, I'm going to hand it over to you soon. Just let me know and you can take it away.
I'm ready.
Okay, so please, Dr. Soin.
Hello, everyone. Did you know that there are more women alive today in ASEAN? I don't want the slides, please. What? No slides yet. Okay, that's it. Apologies. Did you all know that there are more women alive today in ASEAN than have ever died? Yes, there are more women alive today in ASEAN than have ever died. And that's why it is imperative at this time to look at the quality of women's lives in aging. To start off, let us look at an overview of aging in ASEAN and then look at some of the obstacles that women face as they age. First slide, please. Is it on? Great. Now, 100 years ago, life expectancy at birth was not much more than 30. Today, the average in ASEAN is about 70 for men and 75 for women. The longest life expectancy is in Singapore, with Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Brunei just behind. This table gives the average, but so many people will live longer than the average. In the last 100 years, we have more than doubled life expectancy, and this is one of the success stories of human achievement. Let us applaud this major achievement of development, which we tend to take for granted. In addition to that, for every 100 years that pass, life expectancy increases by another 3 years. On a daily basis, life expectancy is increasing by 4 hours each day. And while you are attending this webinar, you are extending your lives by quite a few minutes, so you're not wasting any time. Next slide, please. Not only has our life expectancy been increasing, but we have been having fewer babies. Our fertility rates have gone down dramatically. These two occurrences, increasing life expectancy and fewer babies, have resulted in there being more older people in our societies. According to WHO, the proportion of a society's population that consists of people over 65 determines its aging rate. At 7% of the population, it is called an aging society. At 14%, it becomes an aged society. And at 21%, it becomes a super aged society. Next slide, please. All countries in ASEAN are aging, with the fastest rate in Singapore and Thailand, where 35 to 40% of the population will be over the age of 60 in 2050. Next slide. The older population in ASEAN is not only increasing, but also getting older. We see that the proportion of people over the age of 80 in 2015, when many of you will still be alive, is going to increase many, many times in most ASEAN countries and shoot through the roof in Singapore and Thailand. There is no doubt that aging is our future. And so we have to embrace it and welcome it and get ready for it. Now, why does population aging matter? Population aging matters because of the existence of a fundamental feature of human society, and this is called the economic life cycle. In all modern societies, there are extended periods of dependency at the beginning of life and at the end of life. Children and the elderly consume more resources than they produce through their own labor. So, if there are more older people and fewer babies are born, we will then end up with fewer workers. Thus, there's a fear in societies that older people are going to be dependent on society for an extended period and will consume the resources of the country and be a burden to younger people. However, this fear need not be realized if we prepare ourselves for our aging future. And this is especially important where we women are concerned. Next slide, please. Now, let us look at a few facts about women and aging. 1, on average, women outlive their male counterparts by 2 to 8 years. And thus, the vast majority of older people in nearly all countries are women, and the proportion increases with age. This has been called the feminization of aging. There are only half as many men as women over the age of 80 globally, and this also applies to ASEAN, where women outlive men by about 5 years. Therefore, it's not a good idea for a woman over the age of 80 to look for a soulmate who is a single male and in the same age range. The men are either married or dead. For older women who are looking for a female partner of the same age group, they will be in better luck. Next slide. Number 2, although women have longer life expectancies, they have more illness and disability in general during later life. Dementia, osteoarthritis, and osteoporosis disproportionately affect women more than men. In addition, most of the carers of sick and disabled people at home are women. There is an added responsibility on the shoulders of women. This slide shows that older persons spend up to 10 years of their life with impairment, and the figure is slightly higher for women as compared to men. Next slide. Number 3, older women are more likely to be widowed than older men because of women's longer lifespan and our tendency to marry older men than ourselves. I wonder, of the married men in the audience, how many of you married men younger than yourselves? Not many, I think. Thus, okay, good for you, Junie, well done. Thus, older men who need care are more likely to be cared for by their wives than vice versa. A husband's health becomes the concern of many older women. Often the family's savings are used up for the terminal illness of the husband, leaving the wife financially challenged. Also, in the case of divorce or spousal death, women are less likely to remarry than men. Thus, it becomes a truism that most women must anticipate singlehood in their later years, and this applies to most of us, even though it may not be so welcome. As the status of many women, as the status of women in many societies is linked to having a husband, widows, especially older ones, are particularly vulnerable to poverty, ill health, and social exclusion. Next slide, please. Overall, pension coverages remain low in ASEAN, but the situation is worse for women as compared to men. Number 4, therefore, old age is not gender neutral, and men and women face different circumstances and challenges as they age. The World Bank has reported that old age means something quite different and more troubling for women than for men. The reason for the differences is that throughout life and in all societies, males and females play different roles, receive different rewards, and experience different realities. These gendered experiences result in cumulative disadvantage over life, which comes to a head in old age and adversely affects women more than men. Next slide. Number 5, another factor to consider in aging is the presence of ageism. Ageism means that one is being treated unfairly because of one's age. Negative stereotyping in old age is common, but its gender dimension is a double blow for women. Women become older earlier and are often judged by physical appearances and not by their accomplishments. As soon as women show any visible signs of aging, they are viewed not only as less attractive, but less competent. A double standard of aging has been described in which signs of aging, for example, gray hair, facial lines, they are seen as making men look distinguished, wise, and experienced, whereas they make women look just old and haggard. Next slide, please. The sexless older woman is a common theme in humor and greeting cards. Thus, women are subjected to ageism, sexism, and lookism. Research has found a strong link between ageism and risks to the physical and mental health of older people. Older people internalize these negative stereotypes, and these becoming self-fulfilling prophecies and prevent older people from realizing their potential. Older people begin to question their own ability. For example, I will never get fit at my age, or I'm too old to learn new things. Next slide, please. So according to SCWO, this is the likely future of older women in ASEAN. We are likely to live longer. We are likely to live alone. We are less likely to have an income, less likely to have a pension, less likely to own property, and thus more likely to face higher rates of poverty. Older poor women are more likely to face problems in accessing services in health, education, housing, and decent work. In addition, they are likely to be subject to neglect, abuse, and discrimination. If this is going to be our likely future, we must become aware of it and start taking some action to enhance the quality of our lives as early as we can. We have been forewarned, and so we must prepare and forearm ourselves. And this is exactly what a group of us women did in Singapore in 2008. A demographic study on the status of older women in Singapore was commissioned by SAL Foundation and AWARE, both not-for-profit organizations. And the resulting position paper, based on the Singapore census of 2000, showed that women over 40 would live longer than men, but financially and health-wise would be more disadvantaged than men. Next slide, please. This spurred a group of like-minded women and me to start WINGS, Women's Initiative for Aging Successfully, an organization that enables women over the age of 40 to age successfully in the areas of health, financial security, and social engagement. Next slide, please. WINGS has programs for healthy aging, for financially secure aging, and to help women to engage with the community by volunteering. In addition, WINGS, together with our biggest maternity hospital, KK Kandang Maternity Hospital, has trained more than 500 older women to become confinement nannies. And this can be used as a means to earn a living, or it can help to strengthen family relationships when grandchildren make their appearance. Next slide, please. Therefore, we women can help ourselves at the community level by setting up self-help organizations, but we also need changes to be made in the area of aging policy. There is a great need for gender mainstreaming and gender-sensitive strategies in aging policy. Gender mainstreaming is a public policy concept of assessing how any policy can end up by having different implications for women and for men, and thus preempt any unexpected and negative outcomes. Some policymakers tend to commend themselves on gender neutrality and may not realize that this attitude in thinking and behavior leads to a bias in policy outcomes. There is also an abysmal lack of sex and age disaggregated data and gender analysis all over the world, including in our own countries. These are necessary tools for research and policies on aging. We should also be innovating age-friendly physical environments and social institutions, as well as changing attitudes towards aging, especially in the media. Next slide, please. In closing, let us see how we women can achieve this objective of enhancing the quality of our lives as we grow older. We have to request the leadership of ACWO to focus on this and make sure that they persuade our national leaders to get the resources to make a difference to the quality of our lives as we age. It will make a difference to both the young and the old. We must respectfully demand action. Next slide, please. I thought I'd just show you the book that I wrote about 2 years ago. And if you're interested in getting it, it's available on Amazon. It's about memos for successful aging in the 21st century. In Singapore, you can get it in Kinokuniya. I will end up with a quotation. Getting old is like climbing a mountain. You get a little out of breath, but the view is much better. Of course, said by a woman, Ingrid Bergman. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So much, Dr. Soin. Thank you very much. So Dr. Soin actually provided an overview of women and aging in ASEAN and how we can be more aware of this, and I think how ACWO, afterwards we'll have a more interactive session, how we can help to change society and also influence policies. And our next presenter, Ms. Susana Harding, she'll give you some case studies. And Susana is the Senior Director of, which is part of SCWO Foundation. It is the International Longevity, oh dear, Susana, I probably have missed, International Longevity Center Singapore.
Yes.
I always use the acronym, and I wanted to say it correctly. International Longevity Center. Susana is the Senior Director. It's also part of SCWO Foundation. And Susana really has done quite a bit in the region as well, helping some of the regional women organizations set up networks. So here to share her case studies and her experience, please welcome Ms. Susana Harding.
Thank you, Junie. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to kind of look at all the 4 pages. So if I look at everybody, I need to look at 4 pages, and I see some friends and wanted to say hello. First and foremost, I must really thank the ACWO, the ASEAN Confederation of Women's Organizations, and Junie and June and the team from the Singapore Council of Women's Organizations for inviting me. It's a privilege to be invited to be part of your masterclass this week. And I must say, Kani, I feel also privileged because Kani is somebody who I've always admired since I joined. I moved to Singapore, and I've worked in both the aging, and we were together when we set up Wings back in then, because we've really seen the importance of mainstreaming gender in and really developing specific programs that would help and enhance women's capacity to understand how the aging process would impact them and how to prepare early on in life. So I'm very happy to see that Wings has continued to become a center, a very good part of the successful aging really center in Singapore that allows women, especially just for women to gain the confidence and know how to prepare well for aging. I'm here to share more about how we are doing it in Singapore. And I know a lot of all of us in the Southeast Asia, as Kania said, we are all aging. It's just a kind of like, are you the aging, the aged, or the super aged? No country is still in the super aged. Probably Singapore will be the first one, and we're gonna be nearing there soon. But definitely we are an aged society because our percentage is higher than 14% now in terms of the number of older persons in Singapore. But it's to us who work in, and I've been working in the field of aging for more than 18 years, it's actually a cause for celebration to a certain extent. So I'd like to share our experience in Singapore. Part of this is from the government, and I must say I'm very proud to that the government has been very visionary in terms of how to prepare Singapore well. Of course, not everything is perfect as it is now, but certainly efforts have started since way back in 1980s when there was a ministerial committee that looked at how the future of Singapore demographically. And then early on, they said that we want to inspire you. We are more than happy to share whatever we can share from Singapore, and we also want to learn from you all, because we're not by no means perfect at this point in time, but we're certainly getting there. And because of our demographics, we are kind of way ahead in terms of the numbers. So I will be sharing about our successful, it's not me who's, I'm trying to find, can the next slide please. So I'm sharing how Singapore is working towards a successful aging as a society and as a nation, but I will also focus on our experience in enhancing women's lives as part of that aging process, as part of the successor. Why? Because as Kanye has already explained, so I start by saying, what is the demographic data now in Singapore? In 1970, it's 1 out of 31 was age 65. By 2050, it was 1 out of 8. By 2030, it will be 1 out of 4 already. And by then, we would have more than almost 1 million Singaporeans who will be age 65 and older. To me, it's a cause for celebration because there's going to be a lot of us who will be hopefully not working. Although I'm kind of one of those who want to retire as late as possible. But the other side of it is actually that's coming out of Singapore is we're not just living longer, we're actually able to stay healthier longer. So to a certain extent, what Kanye said earlier about people are living longer, but there's the disability years, the number of years, and especially for women, it's in Singapore, we're trying to kind of reduce that. but we're not yet there in terms of being really able to reduce that. And then the gap between the men and women is still there. But certainly the fact that we are able to live longer is a cause for celebration, but to stay healthy longer is another way to celebrate longevity and aging. So I'd like you to also see, when you look at your data for your countries, don't just look in terms of the number, but ask and find out, what is your healthy years out of that longevity? How many years are you going to be able to live longer but healthily? Because that has a lot of implications in terms of programs, in terms of policy. Next slide, please. In Singapore, of course, now since in the 80s, when the Interministerial Committee, where we are now there is a ministerial committee in Singapore. That means all the ministers is part of a committee that looks at aging and how it impacts everything, every part of our life, from defense to transport to everything. They look at it. And then in 2016, the Secretariat of the Ministerial Committee of Aging in Singapore is actually the Ministry of Health. And in 2016, they came up with a blueprint. And for us in the foundation, we are so happy that this came about, because it defines what is the vision. It operationally, visually define what is the vision of Singapore for everybody to age successfully. And there are 3 pillars that were mentioned. One is opportunities for all ages. As long as you're whatever age group you are, Singapore would like to see a society where everybody can continue to grow, achieve your fullest potential, and be able to learn. So that's the opportunities for all ages. The second is kampong for all ages. I mean, you know the word. Some of you would know the meaning of the word kampong, which is like a village. So we want to create a Singapore that's caring and inclusive society that respects and embraces seniors as an integral part of our cohesive community. And the third part of the master plan is the city for all ages. Singapore to be a distinctive globally, not just for economic success, but also as a role model for successful aging. So in a way, what we are doing now is really sharing, and hopefully that would give us opportunities to share and be able to offer to all of you here and also beyond our region, what are some of the models that has worked for us. Next slide, please. It took them a year to come up with a master plan. And there was a lot of engagement by the government, 4,000 Singaporeans from all walks of life, and their aspiration and ideas on how we can help Singaporeans to age well were taken into consideration to be able to come up with a master plan. Next slide, please. But I'd like to take a little bit, hopefully the ministry will that, but actually the foundation since 1993 have been advocating for successful aging for everybody, for every Singaporean, whatever income strata, to be able to continue to live at your own home, surrounded by your loved one, be able to access healthcare as and when you need it, and be able to be engaged in the community, even if you're frail. And that has been the vision of our founder, Madam Sao Ung Yushun. And since 1993, we have been trying to influence government-related policies and industry practices through our advocacy efforts. Next slide, please. And since then, we organized ourselves into 4 initiatives that look at the different services, capacity building, as well as research and advocacy. So this is how the foundation is organized right now. And we've always put ourselves as a thought and practice leadership on aging and longevity. Next slide, please. The first one that we have done actually since 1993 was develop models of care, health and social care for every type of older person, from the healthy to the frail and dying. And this is what WAMI Center for Successful Aging is about. Next, can you click? So WAMI Center for Successful Aging is a suite of services and programs that deliver health and social services to every older persons that require it as and when they need it. So we have a primary care, we have a care management, coaching, counseling, we have a center-based care, which is a daycare, we have a traditional Chinese medicine clinic, we have a dementia care service, and we have a home medical care that has a component of palliative care, end of life program there. So it's a one-stop, first-stop, person-centered, team-managed, integrated, holistic healthcare. So that was the first kind of 93 to about 2000 and early 2000. Next slide, please. Then we realized that, so while we were developing all these programs and services, we actually realized that the system, the healthcare system, for it to be age-friendly, it would take a while. So we said that perhaps we need to look at how we can pilot test a model that looks at the whole community. So you take one district, one village in your country, and then you implement a successful aging program that looks at three components. One is the integrated care system. How do you assess and find out who is at risk, older person in the community? And if they're at risk, where do they go? So that's the essence of the integrated care system. The other is community participation. How do you ensure that they're able to participate and volunteer as and when? The third part is learning room. How did they continuously learn about something new about their own aging process and how they can continue to take care of themselves? So we developed this model in 2009, and we only had a chance to pilot test it in Whampoa community in 2013. So this is still ongoing. So if you want to see a pilot community site where we are looking at the system level, the care system, the community development, as well as to a certain extent, the educational system in the community for older persons, we can definitely welcome you in Whampoa. The next slide, please. But there are also kind of like a few programs that we feel for successful aging and to enhance women's experience of aging is needed. This program is about looking back at your life before, like a life review program, and it allows you to understand where you were, what was in your past, and potentially by understanding your past, you'll be able to identify what you could do in the future. If you have extra 20 years or 25 years because of longevity, what could you still do? What would you want to still do? So this program allows you that. And we have delivered it with volunteer trained facilitators. So you don't have to have social workers, you don't have professionals to do this. This can be done by volunteers. And it can be done anywhere in the village, in the community, as long as it's a safe space, because there's a lot of personal sharing by the older person. So that one, as long as you can assure that, then the program can be run. The next program, next slide, please, is really around when we were, at some point we said, it's very difficult to change the system. So we said, maybe we need to interface with the older persons, both older men and women, and then we need to empower them to know how to understand their own aging process and how to better take care of themselves. So self-care and health for older persons in Singapore was developed, and we pilot tested it, we evaluated it, and it showed that actually even the lowest educated, zero education older person, 70s, 80s, could still continue to learn about their own aging process, their own health, and how to support each other in that reflection and in that change in their behavior. So one of the impact we see here is actually the medication compliance. So this was a randomized control trial. It's also delivered by volunteer trainers. It doesn't have to be kind of like highly paid or educators or teachers. It can be, even some of our volunteers are actually older persons themselves, older women themselves, and it can be delivered anywhere in the village, even the village. As long as there's some space for them to learn, this can be delivered. The next one, next slide please, is learning from the scope one, the more general health promotion, disease prevention. We ventured now into disease management. So the first one we've started to see, is there a potential to intervene or change the disease management and diabetes by older adults, is on on diabetes. So we developed this. We're still completing the research on this, but there seems to be some positive feedback about the usefulness of the program, as well as some changes in the increase in the number of days of older persons doing blood testing themselves. So once they are able to understand, and it's a weekly training program, and it can be, this one's slightly difficult to be delivered fully by a volunteer, because it has got to have, the trainer has got to have a very strong diabetes management training. So it has got to be somebody with health background in that sense. Next slide, please. Okay. This one is, wanted to just to say briefly that at some point we realized that when you look at successful aging, when you try to develop and see what kind of programs you can create and develop, we need to understand that the older person has 3 dimensions: the bio, the psycho, and the social. So when you want to look at your programs, you may want to also look at which dimension are you changing or impacting. Can you develop something that impacts all these 3 dimensions? Right, so when we try to understand this as against also, and also the functional, next slide, please. So looking at the concept of the functional status, for some of us who understand is the basic activities of daily living, because in older age groups, this is the most important. Are you able to do some of these things? Are you not able to do some of these things? Some of the things that are important to them are as simple as this. It doesn't mean that they need a lot of things, but these are the important things to them, the functional ability to be more functional and independent, right? And then once you understand that, next slide, please, then we kind of like realize that, next slide, that there are actually different profiles of seniors across the life course. And looking at successful aging, and then in what kind of programs you would want to you may, because some of the countries, even for Singapore, resource allocation and prioritization is always important, right? To be able, who needs it most, least cost, you know, that kind of thing. How do you respond with the least cost kind of? So you need to be able to really understand what is the profile of your older persons, your older women and older men in your country, and then be able to then target of all this, who do we prioritize? It can be, do you want everybody across the board? So that's universal. Maybe some of the things like social pension, but other things like activities or programming, you may want to see what kind of profile you're targeting. Then you can then develop some of these programs, right? So next slide, please. Now specifically, so that to a certain extent is what the foundation has been doing since 1993. But specifically because our founder has actually said that she wanted a foundation for older women only. So there is a very strong commitment for the foundation to focus on older women, between men and older women. I mean, we develop all those programs for both, but certainly there's some programs that we are specifically targeting women. And one part of that is really around financial security. Between men and women, as Kania said, whatever the different reasons, we end up poor. Probably would have outlived my husband, but fortunately I married a younger man, so Kani knows this. But that is one of the things. So we developed a financial education program for women, specifically for women. And we have 2008 and then sometimes in 2011, we've managed to work in partnership with the PA Women's Integration Network for this program to be rolled out and then be able to be made accessible to all the women in the community in Singapore. And this program has also been replicated and exported to a certain extent as a program. So SCWO Foundation has experience in terms of exporting and trying to share our models overseas. So this was shared and replicated in Indonesia, and of course in Malaysia with the University Putra Malaysia. Some of them are here as participants I have seen. So that's the one. Next slide, please. The next one that we have done as focus to enhance women's life is while we are educating women on the ground, we need to be able to continue to advocate, because that's how policies are changed. That's how some of the programs are introduced. So that's how some of the programs are then made available to everybody, not just to a few. Advocacy allows organizations like us in working in the civil society to then impact and influence some of these changes at the national level, or it could be at provincial level. So in 2018, we catalyzed the formation of an alliance in Singapore called SCWO, Singapore Alliance for Women and Aging. 4 organizations have come to build and to set up this alliance, and the focus is how we can work together to advocate for 4 specific policy agenda. 2 of the recommendations addresses the needs of working caregivers. So we are looking at, we have kind of proposed to the government, potentially a legislation, the right to request flexible work arrangements. Of course, now that all of us are in this situation, perhaps this may need to be reflected on again. Convert paid childcare leave to family care leave. And then the other 2 recommendations are help to ensure financial security of caregivers in their old age. The first one is to make premiums for care shared life gender neutral. Currently, women pay more premium than men because they say actuarially we live longer, so we need to pay more. So we're trying to see how that can be changed, some support there, and introduce a match savings scheme for caregivers. Next slide, please. The last one, we're more than happy to say that there's been some success. SCWO Foundation has actually did a study on the match savings through the ILC Singapore. We lobbied for it through the Ministry of Finance. We lobbied and we presented a policy brief on this. And then in this year's Singapore budget, the government has announced that they are rolling out a match retirement savings scheme that will benefit 435,000 women in Singapore from age 55 to 70. Next slide, please. I think I am almost in the last. Some of you have been part of this and continue to be part of this. We have also catalyzed the formation of a forum, a women's forum. So this is kind of like every 2 or 3 years, we come together, we kind of like exchange what is happening in our own countries, what is coming out, the trends, some policy we do together, we study together what's happening on the ground, and then we kind of like understand what are the policy implications of some of these trends. So there is actually Asian Women's Forum Financial Security, and some of the network partners are here from the different countries, and hopefully all the rest of the ASEAN countries could actually be part of this forum as well. The last 2 slides, please. Next one. This year, we have embarked on a bit kind of another frontier in terms of replication or kind of catalyzing in the region. So what our experience in Singapore in terms of the setting up of the Singapore Alliance for Women and Aging, we are catalyzing that also in partnership with Help Age International, of which is the international NGO that focuses on aging. We're partnering with them to create, to set up an alliance as well between those who work with aging organizations and those who work with women's organizations in 2 countries because of resource constraints. That's why I say some prioritization may be needed to be able to kickstart, but then let it roll afterwards. So we know that 2 countries have been selected to kind of like be part of this pilot. So Philippines and Thailand, we know that there's a lot of insecurity in terms of situation for older women there. Then the next slide. And the idea is really to create a stronger network of aging and women organizations in Southeast Asia, starting first with these 2 countries. And hopefully these 2 countries can then be the catalyst for the other countries. Or if anybody's interested in this to have it in your country, then more than happy to share with you. And I think that's the last, Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Susana. We are doing very well for time. So I would like to invite questions. Please feel free to write it in the chat. We do have a question from Lena. It's an interesting question, and I'm very sure that we'll have lots of responses. what probably are the reasons for women to live longer than men, despite caring for husband, children, household chores, and working as well? Kani, would you like to take? I think both speakers can answer this.
Well, there are a number of reasons. First of all, men tend to take a lot of risks. So they tend to die earlier in accidents. They also smoke more and have other risk-taking behavior. That's one. For the women, first of all, I think we have less risk-taking, but in many countries where women have started smoking more, the life expectancy is getting closer. Another reason is hormonal and to do with more partly genetic, because our immunity, although we have more osteoporosis, osteoarthritis and all that, our immunity is a little better. And that's why in COVID-19, more men are being affected by the illness than women. But in truth, we don't really know the cause. I think it's nature trying to balance things. Because we have a little bit more of disability in later life, nature is compensating by giving us a slightly longer life. And my own reason for it is nature knows that we are self-resilient and we can do without the men at the end of our life, but the men can't do so well without us at the end of their lives.
How true. Susana, would you like to comment as well?
Well, the doctor has spoken. yeah. It's actually what Kani has said is true. I mean that's the evidence. But I'm sure there are other demographers here. Maybe they can also help us to answer this question, because this is really I mean something that the evidence is there. And Kani has already explained, so I think that should be sufficient.
Okay, there was an article that talked about the endurance genes in women. And that's one of the reasons as well that we are able to do much better during COVID. All the responses, as all of us know from the women leaders in the world, we are faring much better, the countries, compared to those led by men. There is another question here. It's about mental health of older women, such as I think that's important. Mental health has become quite an issue coming up to the forefront these days. So maybe, Kani, you'd like to comment on that?
Yes, unfortunately, I mean, we get dementia and much more, even if you look at age range, we tend to get more dementia in old age than men do. I'm not quite sure that we know the reason for it. It could be genetic, but leaving aside the environmental causes, of course, of depression, and depression often brings on dementia earlier. And of course, some of the things that people have found, changing the question, is that when you're more educated and socio-economically you're in a better state, then dementia doesn't appear so quickly, or at least it's not apparent, because you have a certain cognitive reserve. The more education you have a cognitive reserve. So if you lose a little bit, it's less likely to be evident. So this is where, as I said earlier, that this is a cumulative disadvantage. When from the time we are born till the time we die, women are disadvantaged more in their resources, even in their food supply, in their education, in making sacrifices. So all this comes to a head in old age. And all this can then lead to dementia more in women than in men. But I'm sure many other, Susana and many other people in the audience can add to this. I'm sure they will add.
There are more women who get dementia, primarily because also of that we live longer, and to a certain extent.
Susana, if I may interrupt, even if you exclude the age difference, even then women tend to get dementia more than men. But you're right, of course, because they live longer is one.
Yeah. So that's to a certain extent is there, but as Kanya said, it's something that can be prevented. Lifestyle changes needs to be, education plays a big part. That's why it's very important. And if you look at life course, that means we shouldn't start at age 60. Just because you turn 60, you start thinking about how to change a lot of your lifestyle. But the accumulation of the if we start early on, then we don't need to accumulate a lot of things. If there are things that we can prioritize to accumulate early on, or kind of like not have the disadvantages, that's why it's important for women's organizations to understand that aging doesn't start at age 60. It starts when you're born. The issues of women that you're fighting for in terms of domestic violence, in terms of girls and all these things actually impacts their aging years. So I'm very happy that you're working on these issues. What we're trying to say is, as you work on these issues, you have maybe need to expand your horizon and your analysis to include that this disadvantages actually doesn't stop. It continues in their old age. And if you have also the disability in old age, then it's going to be triple whammy, as Kanya said. You're poor, you're disabled, and you have a lifetime of disadvantages, whether it's domestic violence, whether whatever it is. So the more that we work towards some of these disadvantages, we try to kind of stop it at some point. There was one comment, the demographic is changing. A lot of women are educated. You know, in Singapore, I kind of always say this. We did a study. In Singapore, a lot of women are highly educated. But by the age of 30, which is the critical age, to age 34 until 39, at some point they go to work part-time, they get out of the labor force, and they don't come back. So even a highly educated person or woman in Singapore, in a highly developed society like Singapore, we have a problem of women either voluntarily or by default, because of these gender roles that we have been conditioned. We are the one who say, never mind, I'll be the one to sacrifice my career, let the husband. And we don't come back. So no matter how much investment we put into the education of girls, if at some point they stop working, that's it. Their lifetime of disadvantages will start. And in Singapore, we've seen that. The study that Kani was saying, by age 39, the discrepancy in terms of savings in their CPF account diverges by age 39, because that's where the trajectory. So when you look at life stages, or when you look at how to enhance women's experience of aging, you need to have all this data. You need to be able to have both the aging and the gender lens and look at it together. What does it mean for a woman in their 20s now? What does it mean for a woman in their 30s? And then you respond accordingly. So every one of us counts a lot in terms of changing how these disadvantages can be untangled and stopped at some point.
There is actually a question that's related to what you said, because it talks about the experience where women are involved more on the unpaid caregiving of the elderly compared to the men. And that's why then we become financially disadvantaged as well at the end, and then we tend to live longer. So
even the highly educated woman struggles with that decision.
Yeah, that is the main obstacle that women face, is our caregiving responsibility. We've been able to enter the workforce, we've been able to become politicians, we're able to become CEOs, but where caregiving is concerned, whether it's of children, older husbands, parents, how many women, middle-aged women give up their jobs to look after older parents? So this caregiving burden on women is something that all women's organizations and we have to look at and see how it can be divided with the men, how with the community, and by policy making. So it's not all on our shoulders, which we already have frailer, narrower shoulders than men, and yet more burden is placed on our shoulders. So this is something we have to think about and really try to change in our countries.
Yeah, may I just add on? If you look at SCWO, if your country is a signatory to SCWO, there's actually a very important provision there around this. And so there is a provision there around caregiving as to make it as equitable as possible. So that means we'll really disentangle that it's just a woman's job. If you want it to be a woman's job, you better pay for it now. You know, that kind of thing. So it's something that we should really look at. So there are laws, there are provisions for us to advocate for some of these changes to happen. Perhaps we need to really also work and engage the men organizations in your country on how to kind of have this kind of support, because it's that's the only way I think is could we change substantially some of these disadvantages.
So in my introduction of Kani, I did say that she was our first female nominated member of parliament. So Kani, there's a question for you really, as a former parliamentarian. How likely do you reckon, and how much longer before there's a pro-women stance, you know, in debating bills and you know, making a mark for Singapore, being able to have policies that are really, you know, looked at and tabled through a gender lens, because it's important.
I think in most international organizations, including the UN and all that, says that we will only get equality in 200 years. So, you know,
but there are some evidence. The first thing, which is more practical, is to have more women parliamentarians. There's evidence out there, literature that studied how, when there are more women parliamentarians, how there are more laws that are more family orientated, that are more supportive of some of these measures. So we need more parliamentarians. A lot of you are leaders in your own community, leaders in your own country. Yeah, that's one way.
I think we need gender-friendly men and women. You see, because if you look at women leaders, you look at Margaret Thatcher, you look at another few notable examples, they haven't made a difference. So what we need...
But we have Jacinda Ardern and...
Yes, exactly.
Balance it out.
We need people to be aware of gender, the differences of gender, and how everybody can realize their potential. But I don't see it coming in my lifetime. I pray that it'll come in the lifetime of some of you in the audience.
Susana, there's one question.
Yeah. Yes, okay. Sorry.
There's a question that a participant would like to ask, really is how we can help women in the rural community.
Yeah, the first thing, as that's why I kind of like emphasize some of our programs can actually be delivered even in the villages. You just need to, even our financial education program, when it was replicated in Indonesia, they can run it in the village. So there's a National Federation of Women in Indonesia that we work with, PPSW. So they actually have members in 7 provinces and in the village. So what you need is just we can do the training of trainers, and then we can share the curriculum. For that project in Indonesia, we needed some resource to be able to contextualize, because what society in Singapore is a bit different from everybody, right? So we needed to contextualize the program for your own context, for the country's context, and then we train, and then you can run away with it already. So there's actually, and then you can have volunteers, retirees. In Singapore, we are able to mobilize some of the retirees as volunteer trainers, volunteer facilitators. Even we now have like some of our counselors that helps older people in terms of their mental health struggles, or family caregivers, caregiver stress, are actually what we call para counselors. So we have been training para counselors, we have been training para trainers. So these are volunteers that can actually kind of enhance their skills as well in terms of providing support to your program. Yeah, so there are ways that it can be delivered.
Okay, thank you, Susana. I think there's a question on longevity. We talk about productive longevity these days, but I also noted from Kani's presentation that the impairment, older persons spend up to about 10 years, you were saying, right, with impairment. And there was also mention of feminization of aging. So how important is the need to engage women in like advanced medical directives and in our Asian society? And also end of life care.
I would like to take a positive spin on this, and I think Susana touched on it. First of all, we are living longer, but if we take the right policies and the right behavior change and the right education, we will live healthier longer. So the in medical jargon is called compression of morbidity, where we will live a long life and then have a short illness and die.
Yes.
That's what we should be achieving for. And if we do look after our health, and if the right policies are put into place, then we should be able to do that. And so then, you know, things like medical, signing
Advanced Medical Directive, AMD.
Yeah,
AMD.
All that means is that don't resuscitate me when I am dying. To tell you the truth, most doctors, when they see a person is quite old and frail, they don't really resuscitate you. So what would be more important is to give your power of attorney, because you're more likely to get into dementia, and then you may not be able to use your own resources to look after yourself. So a power of attorney is more important than an advanced medical directive. I think, you know, we should all look after ourselves, and then, of course, when we are ill and we die in hospital, we can sign the advanced medical directive. But as I see it, it's often the relatives who don't want the doctors to let the patient go. And to respect the relatives' wishes, we sometimes have to let the person sort of be on the tubes and everything for a week or so for them to accept the fact that the person is going. So in a way, it is also psychological, you know. So of course, people can sign the advanced medical directive. It's a good idea, but I would rather they also look after their health so that they live a long, healthy life and then die
quickly.
Yeah, the first thing I think is for me, well, primarily because maybe I'm more a policy person. So if I look at the country, the WHO has a very good actually policy around this. So there's going to be a decade of healthy aging, but so we need to be able to make sure that the policies are actually addressing older persons as part of that. So that's very important, because otherwise a lot of the policies are actually doesn't include older persons. So you need to also make sure that it's there. Second is, between the men and older women, are the women going to be disadvantaged or not? So then you look kind of second layer that. Then that becomes easier. At the individual level, prevention is always better than cure. So anything that allows you to kind of feel that you are preparing for your own old age is quite good, including preparing your will, lasting power of attorney. All these are tools, but there's also technology. So even if you develop some disability, there's also that you can bounce back. And then, of course, dementia is slightly different. The cognitive impairment is slightly different than physical disability. But technology helps. So how friendly, how much technology do you have also in your country, and this can support you, so that then you can still experience some sort of independence, some able to enjoy, even if you have disability. And how, despite our disability, there is an enabling environment for us to be able to have that disability and yet still be able to have some sense of belonging, that we're part and able to make decisions of our own. So there's a bit of complexity in there, but I think that's the idea that we, as social leaders, as community leaders, need to be able to take into consideration.
Okay, I have one more question. It's from Vietnam. About senior women, especially women who live in rural areas. They have to undertake parenting to their grandchildren because children have migrated to cities seeking, other jobs and to earn a living. And the senior women in rural areas are not only facing aging problems, they also suffer from the burden of their children. The question is, do you have any ideas to help senior women deal with the situation? It's probably not a easy answer, but it's something that can be discussed as well. Please.
That will be, Susana can add more. And this is not only in the rural areas, but even in the urban areas where often, before the flexible work arrangements and working at home, it's the parents in families where both people in work, the couple, the husband and the wife, it's again the same story. It's grandmothers and grandfathers who have to look after the grandchildren, especially grandmothers. So this goes back to the burden of caring always falls on a woman's shoulder, whether it's an urban area or a rural area, whether it is old or young. And I think part of it is cultural. Everybody thinks that women are good carers and this is their responsibility. So we have to change attitude. Of course, if you had policy changes, like if you could have after school centers for these children, then the grandmothers won't be so burdened. And then also, if these countries had their own job generating economies, then many of the young people will not have to, like from Indonesia and the Philippines, many of them come to higher income countries like Singapore to find a job, you see. So the countries in ASEAN will have to make sure that their citizens get jobs in their own countries and the economy. So it's not an easy problem to solve. And we need good leaders in ASEAN. And also we need a little bit of intra-ASEAN cooperation, because Singapore is benefiting from the migrant labor, especially from, and so is Thailand benefiting from Indonesia, from Thailand and Cambodia. So I think by intra-ASEAN cooperation, where the richer ASEAN countries can help to locate some of their industries in the less rich ASEAN countries. So we won't need so much of migration from one country to the other and disrupt families and put all the burden on grandmothers.
Yeah, for me, it's grandparenting is, my husband and I were just talking about it. When we retire, he said, we have a bet who will be the more kind of like spoil our grandchildren between. So I said, we have a bet who will be the more spoiler between us. So that's one. So it's something, I think, even I don't have a kid, but I look forward to having a grandchild from my husband's son. So it's kind of naturally that nurturing could be part of our gene. So I don't think we should.
Susana, I want to interrupt. Part of who's
maybe the doctor will say no.
There is no nurturing.
There's no nurturing. Okay.
Yeah.
I've been.
It's more cultural and
yeah.
it's more
cultural. Yes, that one can be changed. Okay. So when something is not, when something is cultural, it can be changed. But society has told us that's something that we look forward to. So I think we should celebrate the fact that they are able to take care of their grandchildren. There are economic reasons why that is happening. But what is important is there has got to be supporting system for them should they need the care. Are there volunteers? There are programs that out there that helps to support older women in the villages as carers But when they need care, are they able to go to the, is there a community healthcare worker that is trained on community-based kind of gerontology or geriatrics, or at least the basic health monitoring for older persons? Is there currently the community healthcare system across the region has not been educated or trained in terms of geriatric and the field of aging. So we need to be able to do that, so that then there could be a such. So health is very important. Then what about economic? Of course, the basic is the family will provide, right? Because you cannot just leave your grandchildren and then expect the grandparents to pay for it. So there has got to be. But then the older persons themselves, because they have contributed a lot, are they receiving social pension? If they have work at all, are they receiving pension from work? If there is no work from pension because they have been mother, grandmother all their lives, what does society compensate for them to be able to continue to take care of their grandchildren? And that is a societal responsibility. So we need to have that discussion. In the absence of not having that support or very little support, because the money that's coming from the children working in the city is meant for the grandchildren, not meant for the grandparents. So as they do that kind of care, what can society contribute to them so they can actually still continue to pay for their own needs and be able to take care of themselves? I think so grandparenting is, to a certain extent, is something that culturally we want to change, perhaps, maybe, but in a very caring, or we want to be caring at the same time we want to be kind of like, transactional. So we need to find a balance between that there's a need to care, and then if the grandfather is not there, of course the grandmother would step in. But that stepping in, what does it mean? How does society look at it? Is it something that, oh, okay, you do that yourself? But then we need to be able to then have that conversation, I think, as a society.
All right. Thank you very much, Susana. And thank you, Kani and Susana, for this very good question and answer segment. And thank you all for your questions. Some are still coming in. Very interesting questions. It's time now for us to go into our little breakout rooms. I'm going to pass some of the admin instructions to the Secretariat. So the Secretariat, please.